Hi, welcome to Managing Client Collaborations. I am Mary O'Shaughnessy, the IT Director at Her Justice, and my compatriot here is John Greiner, the Executive Director, founder of Just Tech. Terrific guy, knows many things about many things, and is gracious and clear in explaining stuff. So our goal today is to elicit conversation, share some information about how we collaborate with clients and to some extent other advocates. We're going to start with talking about e-signatures, particularly in these remote days. It is safer for signing at a distance, and there are tools that have been out there a while. There are some new tools, and there are new ways of using them. We're going to talk about other ways to collaborate with clients and sharing documents, scanning, providing safe spaces for clients, and then talking about possibilities with other organizations. So we have about 15 minutes of things to talk about, and we're really hoping that we have a lot of conversation with the group that is assembling. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to John to talk about e-signatures. I should say that we have a survey. If you look at the bottom here, this is a URL that you could actually type in. We use tinyURL for a reason. This is a survey about e-signatures, and John's going to talk a little bit more about a prior survey that we did.
That's right. Again, it's a small group, so we're going to try to go through things at a fairly high level, but we're happy to dive a little deeper and talk about tangential implications of e-signatures and remote collaboration. Real basic. E-signatures. They come in sort of many shapes and sizes. From checking a box and saying I accept the terms, to penciling something with your finger on an iPhone, to these more sort of fully developed platforms that are designed for e-signatures that are compliant with state and federal and sometimes international standards. And the relevance of e-signatures, of course, it was important before. It's gone up. Its use in the legal aid community has increased. I'll talk a little bit about a survey that Mary and I just did, a national survey. Again, there are certain components of e-signatures that are typical of even the most basic tools, and ideally they're at least including some sort of identification of the person. A time and date stamp has some ability to log and some level of security to ensure that that data hasn't been manipulated. And then there are certainly more advanced systems and commercial systems that make more extensive use of cryptography to help ensure that the document that's signed or the item that's approved doesn't get modified. And there is even some use of blockchain technology that helps actually sort of provide that level of assurance that it's a signature, an electronic signature, but it allows for greater privacy and makes it more immutable and certainly sort of more replicated so that it's not just one server or system that has your data, it's spread out. So it can go from very, very simple, writing your signature on a note on an iPhone and pasting it into a document to something that's a lot more complex. And there are different state statutes around electronic signatures, but the U.S. government uses this FIPS 186-4 standard that you can read more about. There's a little link that we put in a tiny URL, wiki eSign, that just gives you a little bit more depth and certainly other resources to hop off and sort of peruse. So what are providers doing right now? I mean, again, this is about legal services. So they're using signature tools that are already in systems they have. So tools like Legal Server. If you're using, and I'm not sure how many New York State providers are using DocAssemble, but using a free tool like DocAssemble that was written by a legal aid attorney in Pennsylvania, or you have Adobe Acrobat Pro, or you have Apple Preview on a Mac, you're able to use signatures, the squiggly types, and so providers have been doing that for a while. They're using it more now, so it's not an additional cost, but it is some complexity that you got to like sort of learn how to use that tool. And potentially, if you're working with a client, they're going to need to access the internet to sign off on some of these documents. There are other commercial tools like Adobe Sign, DocuSign, and others, and we're not endorsing any one. They have a lot of different pricing models. Some of them host your documents for you and make them available, I don't know, in perpetuity, because things could happen, they could go out of business, but it's sort of an interesting sort of point about sort of the security of those documents. Part of why they are expensive, though, generally, is that they have this sort of obligation to maintain these documents and that information in a durable fashion. Providers, again, are really, at least in the survey we did and in talking with a few over the past 6 months, they're worried about confidentiality and security, and so it's important for us to keep that in mind. But it's certainly, would you want to use that to get confidential information out to a client versus having a pleading that you're going to file in court? I mean, again, that's where there's some difference of use. If it's going to be something you're going to file in court, it's not going to have the same level of confidentiality as a client giving you evidence or information that you would use in formulating your case. Providers are using them for all kinds of documents, as you can see, so it's really across the board. And then a really neat thing is using e-signatures with document assembly or document automation, even in like Legal Server, so that you're getting sort of the benefit of some additional speed and the benefit of being able to get a signature over the internet instead of all this being done manually and in person. I think again, the impact has been that more providers are using e-signatures for sure. In other states, the courts have actually sort of authorized additional use of the e-signatures more broadly. In New York, it varies, but certainly we just heard at day one of the conference about JustFix NYC and the New York City housing courts about how they're using the technology to sort of file and authenticate and file pleadings without a wet signature. And then certainly agencies in New York, like there's a workers' comp, just as an example, order related to COVID that sort of authorizes the use of e-sign documents. And Governor Cuomo authorized e-notarization, which is a tangent to e-signature, so that you don't get an e-signature on a document and then have to physically go to a notary. Although the need for video conferencing to get a document notarized adds some weight to the process, but still safer and easier and hopefully more doable. There's some resources. One I'm just going to flip over to the survey that we did. We published via Google Docs. So there's a little analysis of the data. I think there's some interesting comments that I posted, some of the most interesting comments, I should say, from the community. And then this you can blow up, but this is the actual data. We told the community we wouldn't share their names and email addresses, without first, talking with them. But if you're interested in any of the, the particular data, I think Mary and I could reach out to the provider that answered that survey and ask that they be put in touch. LSNTAP did a great webinar on e-signatures and scanning. And then the National Center for State Courts has a great Tiny Chat series that I highly recommend, but they had one on signatures and notaries, signatures, notaries, and service that I would, again, highly recommend you going to, and that landing page includes other information that that I found really valuable. So, Mary, back to you.
Sure. Thank you. That's a lot of really good information. And
Oh, and I'm sorry if folks have questions. I mean, I think Mary and I and Stephen talked earlier about if you want to jump in, have questions, please do. We're we may be going too deep or not deep enough, and maybe going too quickly. So we want to be during the presentation, if you have some questions, please feel free to either chat or unmute yourselves.
yes, thank you. So in addition to e-signatures, there are other ways to work with clients and client information. And before we get into some specifics, there are a lot of things, particularly for our service community and the people that we are helping, that we have to think about. We're not working with organizations, we're not working with firms and for-profits. So home IT and home tech capacity is important, safe home capacity. Not every place has fast internet available. Fios is not everywhere, even necessarily in New York City within the 5 boroughs. People who have cell phone plans that are not all inclusive or aren't tight budgets have limited cell data. They perhaps still have limited minutes. What can they use without incurring extra cost to communicate with us? Who has access to that technology is also important. If you are working with a client who is experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner violence, who owns that phone system? Who owns the phone plan? If the abuser is in control, that's a real serious security risk and safety risk. Does the abuser know, even if they don't own the plan, what the client is using the tech for? People who are not hostile, or if it's not a DV situation, there's still confidentiality and privacy. If a client is living in an overcrowded space because of costs or quarantine, having the aunt or the uncle or the kids walk by and Zoom bomb equivalent, or hey, what are you talking about? What does that mean, lawyer? That really can affect the client's ability to talk freely. And is the client comfortable with the technology? If they have it, if they have a phone that is a smartphone, if they have the bandwidth, if they have the cell data, are they comfortable using it? This is new. Asking a client to scan a document or ask a client to be on a video interview with a tool that's not what they're used to, that's hard. And then that implies for us, do we have the capacity to train and support clients? And maybe not if you have an outsourced or a small in-house IT department that's already supporting the advocates on the other side of all this. Does your organization have space? Given that we are now in a primarily remote work environment, maybe you have an office that is not populated and may be able to set up an individual office. I mean, that's what we've done at Her Justice. We have spaces that are not populated by staff. And so we have set up, what I'm talking to you on is a client setup in our space. Do you have the capacity to set up a temporary account that a client can log in, do a virtual court hearing, and then at the end, either break the account down, destroy it, or let the client keep it for the length of the case? How long is that case? These are questions. We're not positing answers here, but we're surfacing things that we need to think about as a group. Are there other organizations that might have some of these spaces, that maybe a law firm, maybe another nonprofit that has the capacity for this? And will the client, if the client has all of those things, do they want to use it? Is this something that we put in a retainer? Can the client object to recording? Can the client object to videotaping? What are the parameters of what the client is assenting to? John, can you scroll down a little bit? So document sharing. Now, when I say asynchronous communication, this is not the video chat. This is the client sends you something and then you see it hopefully shortly, but not real time. Clients do photograph documents because they have a phone, they can do that. But then you have to assemble those pages. If a client's taken a picture of 10 pages of a complaint, you have to put it together again. And then what does that imply for the security and the non-repudiation capacity? That this document was 10 pages, it is now 10 pages, and here are the photographs, and how do you prove that process? There are applications designed for this. Not all of them are free. Some of them may be harder to use. Also, a client with not much storage space on their phone, this could be an issue. Secure email and chat. Everybody knows about Google. Everybody knows about Gmail, Yahoo. There are still some people out there with AOL. Do we want to offer clients information about specifically secure email tools? ProtonMail and Tutanota are both based in Europe. Their servers are in Europe. They're more secure. They're subject to the GDPR privacy rules. For chat, maybe not Slack, not the native chat applications, but WhatsApp and Signal are possibilities. They're free, they're secure, and they're available. Then to real-time communication, what's the advantage? Clients who are users of ASL natively, or if they are, that is their primary language, video works much better. Right? Other interpretation picks up body language, facial expressions, and it's video. It has some significant advantages over just phone. And all of those things, the video, are subject to the above considerations. So then I mentioned collaboration with other organizations. There's also private businesses and community service providers, non-legal, that may have capacity for us. Mobile carriers do have discounts. Unfortunately, Verizon's Hopeline service ended, but there are discounts available from T-Mobile's and other. I'm not advocating for any one or another carrier. They are very subject to geographical limitations, but it's worth an exploration. If you have social workers on staff, sometimes the social work staff can do that kind of outreach. Faith-based organizations, restaurants in, outside the 5 boroughs or outside Manhattan can have space that you may be able to access with a partnership agreement. For example, a restaurant that might have 100 seats may still be opening limited hours, and they may have a party room. So that's something to think about and an option to explore. Faith-based organizations have big houses of worship sometimes, depending on the kind of history they have with spaces. An important point for that, though, is to make sure that your clients feel comfortable going to a house of worship, if that is either different from or if they do not belong to any faith tradition themselves. John, can you want to scroll down a little bit? So all of that said, I'm going to turn this back to John to talk about the upsides. I've been sort of the risk, glass half empty, and John's going to take you to the glass half full.
Well, and if I could just add, I mean, so Mary has put together these meeting rooms for clients they can do hearings, they can do their sort of online research or reading. Mary, are these rooms that you're thinking you might keep longer term, so that like when your staff may be back in the office, that the client could go in and have their own private, safer office to meet with their attorney that's maybe literally next door to them, but yep, more secure? Is that part of the? Yes,
the idea here is that if an attorney certainly if one of our staff attorneys is working with a client, our staff offices are private now. We are not bringing people in, but these are the 3 spaces that a clients can continue to use. And as far as the way we are projecting now, as long as we are in this space, we will be using these rooms for client services.
That's wonderful. And again, I think that from the organizations that we work with, a lot of them are not expecting to have anywhere near half of their space occupied, right? The 50% mark. So, to consider, I guess I would suggest that at least people consider doing something similar to what Her Justice and Mary did, providing these, private intake rooms or otherwise, and obviously maintaining security, that, as Mary pointed out, is really important, but it's like, we've got some space. I mean, clients may not have something nearly as amenable for them to have a concentrated, quiet environment where they have that privacy and everything else. So it's a really kind of creative solution. I would also want to add that the Rochester, New York community has done a lot of work around sort of collaboration in light of COVID and interdisciplinary, not just the legal community, not just the courts. And you might want to reach out to VLSP. I don't want to put anyone on the hook in particular there right now, but they've done some great work, and they were part of this universal access, in Monroe County consortium, and COVID just amped it up, 10 times and sped things up. So collaboration is certainly, I think, going to be. It has been a key, and it will continue to be a really important key to getting through the pandemic and continuing to serve our clients.
John, one thing
yeah.
I'd add about our capacity to build out these rooms was that when we went to laptops, we deployed laptops quickly in April. Then we had all these machines that were actually pretty good, that were desktop machines that we weren't using anymore for staff. So that's how we came up with the adequate equipment.
Great. So you didn't have to buy anything really. You had to maybe clean it up, like put a desk or a chair somewhere maybe where it wasn't, but you had no capital expense.
We had to buy webcams.
Oh, webcams. Okay. Well, and that's expensive these days. It's probably double what it would have been 9 months ago.
Yeah.
So again, I think we talked about there are obviously some upsides, health and safety of our clients and our staff, to working, being able to do more remotely. Certainly saving time with travel. So as much as it's really helpful to have in-office space for clients, if we could collaborate and say, oh, I've got a client in Queens, hey, maybe, Legal Services NYC's Queens office could be used by a Her Justice client, right? Like this is where we could start to get creative to provide a little bit more geographic sensitivity, because even traveling on the subway, is some risk. Upstate, certainly, I think there's some overlap with territory, but probably if you're looking at other non-legal entities. And again, speed. I mean, we can meet more quickly. Certainly, we always had phone calls, but having the ability, is, once you take into account everything Mary just raised about bandwidth and data caps and stuff like that, it certainly can accelerate our work with our clients. And then, again, giving our clients access. So if one example was Mary, creating accounts for her clients so they have access to their data whenever, wherever. And as we heard at, I think, last year's conference about the WRAP app, I mean, as we start to make more of our data that belongs to our clients, the data they give us or the work product that we deliver available to them securely online, it really sort of amplifies the value of that work and that data for our clients. So we see that as at least a silver lining in a horrific pandemic. And these might be things that I think at least some of the providers are going to continue on post-pandemic, which we hope is soon. So I think that's the end of the sort of the presentation part. So we really want to just open it up to your questions and your comments and your solutions. I mean, it really is a discussion.
John, one thing I'd add about the app solution. When we talked about it as we were getting ready for this, and we talked about how apps can be really custom built, but then people have to use them. So if you have an app, then that's great, but the clients need to install them. You need to keep it updated, and the life cycle of any kind of custom software development it's really its own topic. It could be its own conference. And the costs involved with that.
Right.
If you have the
Well,
infrastructure to support
and
it.
maybe I would just say, Mary, to that point, maybe it's better that we create more web apps than like downloadable apps. So if you have access to a browser, you know, I think the WRAP app, which I think Catholic Charities developed, is just browser based. I mean, but your points are well taken. You've got to maintain that app. You've got to maintain the security of it. You can't just build something and leave it on the internet and not expect it to be compromised. I mean, it will be if you're not managing it and maintaining it.
So do we have any questions, comments?
Hi, this is Sun. I work for the New York State Courts and I do the ADJ forms, the DIY forms here. And I just want to know about your experience of trying to get, so my difficulty right now is trying to write instructions so that people can actually put a signature onto a PDF and scan it back or do whatever it is that they have to do. And I don't know, I mean, I've only really done the instructions for one program, which is a support modification, which gets a lot of use. And I haven't gotten any complaints, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any complaints. And so I just want to know what your experience is right now of if you, I don't know, email or send papers to someone to have them sign or expect them to do something to them, like, are they able to do it or do they need a lot of hand holding or just what are you seeing right now?
Mary, do you want to start off?
I see a lot of hand-holding on both sides. So the concept of e-signatures makes sense to advocates, but that physical open PDF, you know, click here, do this. The step-by-step works if and only if you can be sure that what you were writing instructions for is what the client is seeing. And that can be all over the place, right? So they could be using a tablet, they could be using a smartphone, they could be on the web. So it's easy to go down a rabbit hole of if you have this, do this, like you wind up with a flow chart. So the best, my experience so far is you will see something like this. This is where you will click, but managing expectations for all of this is really important. It's okay to say that you cannot predict what the client is seeing.
Sun, and hi, I haven't spoken in a while, but so I haven't played with ADJ in a few years. So I'm not sure how that interface works with these signatures or just, you know, the hand-drawn signatures. But I would say, you know, one of the things that that we talked about, like in terms of getting your client's permission. Now, they're not your clients, right? I mean, like, you know, in terms of the courts, they're coming in, they're filling out paperwork, open to everybody. And so it's a little bit more challenging. In the legal services context, we have that opportunity at intake during our screening to find out what their technology is. Do you have a cell phone? Okay, great. Do you have access to an app store or not? You know, like, so we can give you a link to download a free scanning app, let's say. So when you have that interaction with the client, I gotta say, it's a lot easier than when you're trying to generate something, as Mary says, that could run the gamut from, you know, I have an old, you know, a Windows laptop, a Windows 7 laptop or something, you know, it's not even secure anymore. And I have a mouse. And so I don't know if everyone else has ever tried on some of these, you know, services to do your signature with a mouse, and boy, is mine pretty ugly. But again, it's the intent. It doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful. But the variability is, I think, a challenge. But I would say that maybe, you know, this is sort of a good topic for the community to work on, that maybe we could sort of hack together some better instructions or a decision tree or something that's, again, simple, kind of like A2J, for a client who might want to electronically sign a document like that, you know, to take into account the variabilities that I don't think most providers have yet had to deal with, because they have the benefit of having a relationship, you know, with each client.
Yeah, I have a feeling that what's happening right now is that forms are being sent in either through a mail or through, there's something called EDDS now here, where you can just send forms into a court, and that they're figuring it out on that side if it's not signed. So you know, it could be during the time of the hearing, or it could just be someone's being called or whatever. So maybe that's why I'm not hearing complaints, but every time I don't hear complaints, I know that there are complaints, and it's driving me crazy right now. And so, I mean, as far as I know, everyone's like, oh, this is so great, it was so useful, thank you so much. Great, thank you. What kind of problems have you been having? And no one's telling me anything. So, all right, thank you.
Would you have, I mean, like, forgetting about e-signatures for a moment, if you think about your experience, because you've had years of experience in this area, you know, kind of getting your customers, let's say, right, you know, to take advantage of the tools that you've built, you know, like, has video worked for them? Like, have you, you know, if you had some, like, here, click on this 2-minute video, if you have an iPhone or an Android, or if you have a trackpad on your laptop.
Right. I mean, theoretically, something like that may help, but I'm not really sure. A lot of it is just there are too many people using these forms, and I don't know what they're doing right now. And so that's basically, I'm trying to do this on a very large scale, and I don't know if it's working.
You might also talk to Claudia at Law Help Interactive.
Yeah.
I think because, you know, obviously with that service as well, there are a lot of folks who are, you know, no one's client necessarily, right? Like, they're not a client of a particular provider, and so they're using these publicly available forms, and so they've certainly been using e-signatures for a while in many states, you know, and I think they've probably dealt with sort of the range of end user tech issues, more than we have.
I'm wondering if this is just a brainstorm or a brain shower. If you could get at the amount of difficulty people have with a form, like, you know, when they started to interact with your site and when they finally filed their forms, if that's a big time gap, if there's a way to get at that time gap, maybe the longer the time gap, the more.
No, I have a feeling, I mean, there are people who don't even have printers right now. And so, you know, if you are doing it on an iPhone, you can just add a signature to the PDF that gets produced, and it's fairly easy, and then you can email it and do whatever you want with it. But I mean, there's a bigger picture here which is literally, we need legislative change so that we can get around this stuff. And minus that, I just feel that the hearing officers and the judges are just being super forgiving right now. So,
But will it last? And that's the problem.
Not ideal. And so,
or will it be challenged? Because I think that's the other thing that, you know, that's happening in some states, that, you know, that litigants, of course, they want to attack whatever they can. If they can't win on the facts or the law, they're challenge the process. So, so we'll probably be seeing more decisions, you know, in terms of sort of whether what we've done during COVID is acceptable.
Yeah.
Are there other thoughts about Sun's questions, you know, in terms of, you know, helping users really sort of take advantage of these signatures, or other questions that you have?
One thing we didn't talk a lot about was accessibility for people who use, for example, screen readers. And then the thing, I am not familiar with a lot of the A to J stuff. What does all this look like for non-Latin alphabets? So for clients, producing documents in, for example, for client information documents, not that they need to sign them, but like the instructions that Sun was talking about. How does all that look like in Chinese, Hindi, you know? Because some of these tools, that the features that we like seem to be limited to the Latin alphabet installations.
Good point. Our bias.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but also, like, if you try to do machine translations, it is better than it was 10 years ago. But I still laugh at stuff when I read it in Korean, and you're like, that's not it, you know? And so, you know, I mean, we are like I depend on translators to actually translate for me. And so, you know, they will rewrite all the instructions, and they will rewrite screens for, you know, in A to J, and, you know, they will rewrite stuff. They'll write stuff for me because I so don't trust machine learning, machine translations. But that's a really good point, actually. It's just, maybe you could be like, you could try, but, you know, good luck with that. And we hold no responsibility for anything that you're about to read. And so, yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, well, there was a session at the NLADA before COVID hit in Detroit, you know, around e-translations, and you know, again, and Lillian back in our state, actually, she was on the panel, you know, Lillian Moy, you know, certainly, who's, I think, been leading a national effort in that area to, you know, to help guide and in appropriate ways curtail the use of automated translation. I mean, I think it's as you said, it's gotten better, but it still can be laughable, and it's not funny when it prejudices our clients and maybe endangers their safety, because if they don't get it right, and, you know, it's a DV case or you know, a child neglect or something case, you got a lot on the line, or even just losing their housing.
Once you're past Spanish, the quality of machine translation seems to drop off super dramatically. We had a client who in terms of the availability of interpretation and language, we had a client who spoke Mandinka, and she was afraid of having any interpreter because the Mandinka speaking community in New York City is so small. She was sure that whoever we got would know her abuser.
Wow.
And machine translation for Mandinka, I would bet money that that is not there.
Other questions? Anything that we got into that folks would like us to dive a little further into? I mean, we wanted to kind of keep it high level enough, but certainly happy to explore some of these topics in a little bit more depth. And you're also, you know, free to peruse other sessions, but we want to, you know, it's your time, so whatever we can do to help. I don't like, well, while you're thinking about it, I'm going to just flip over to, I think one of the comments that was really important, I thought, from this national survey, basically saying that a lot of agencies, meaning, you know, providers, think that, you know, the authentication issues, that there's this authentication issues with like these hand-drawn e-signatures. And at least this organization, you know, finds that that's really not the challenge. So whether you're using DocuSign and paying, in some instances, $3, you know, a set of documents to get signed, e-signed, or you're using something free like DocAssemble, you know, it's not really important in quite a few courts, at least nationally, in terms of their acceptance of those documents. So, you know, I think and again, I think with COVID, it's gotten better. I mean, what we saw consistently was that, you know, more courts, more agencies are accepting e-signatures of any sort, and so I think if that's a worry that, you know, providers have, you know, will I be able to actually, you know, use it? It's certainly worth talking, I think, and that was certainly sort of important. We heard that with the JustFix presentation on Wednesday last week. You know, building those relationships with the courts, the judges, the clerks, and many providers already have those relationships, or at least have them at a bare level, at a minimum level. But, you know, getting into some of these discussions with the court staff. And Stephen Hicks, who's with us and is volunteering to help with all the tech on this call. You know, I think that, you know, there's a lot of great will with the courts, and I think with administrative agencies, to make this work. So would just encourage people to not be skeptical about whether it's worth investigating. I think if there's a need, if it's going to actually help serve your clients and your staff, because also getting your staff signatures is an issue, it's worth that exploration at a minimum. And again, I just like cost range. I mean, this is not a detailed sort of. This was like a 10-minute survey for folks. We tried to keep it really short, but costs range from free for some of these tools or included, like if it's legal server, to a flat rate, yearly cost for some agencies. I assume that's with a limit on the number of documents. Like one agency pays $5,800 a year for e-signatures through DocuSign. But some of these commercial services are per user, but if you basically have one person, a paralegal or attorney, who's the one who uses that tool to go out and get these, federal, statute compliant, FIPS compliant signatures, you're not necessarily going to spend a lot of money. You don't have to get it for 300 people in your agency. You can get it for a select number of folks to run that e-signature process. And that's if you even need one of these commercial services. Mary, any other thoughts in terms of adding and kind of detail?
I think one of the advantages I found, not specifically for e-signature programs, but buying a business package for multiple users makes it easier to control access if you have staff turnover. So that's, in terms of security and manageability, I would rather spend some extra money knowing that when my legal assistant goes off to law school, which is what happens with many Her Justice legal assistants, which is great, I can reassign that license without having to wonder what happened.
Yeah. Well, and I brought to mind one of the comments in the survey was that one of these programs has, and no one's more dedicated than a legal services professional. I'd say, it's the community that does what it does because we love what we do and we love the clients and the mission. But so this attorney took it upon themselves to pay for the commercial license, but likely their own account, their credit card, their repository. And so my CIO hat went off, like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do when that person leaves? Or so I think, Mary, your point again is it's really well taken. It needs to be something that your firm or your court controls as much as you want your staff to feel that committed that they're going to take money out of their wallet to pay for e-signatures, that you really want to do it yourselves if there is going to be a cost.
Yeah. Control is not a bad word when it comes to security.
Yeah, right. And the data that's in there can be confidential or certainly sensitive. And so having that long-term control and again, it's something that a lot of providers are saying, that they talk to clients, ask clients about their access to a private email account that's not shared with a partner or spouse or kids or whatnot, and whether they're agreeable to using the technology. And I think this, applies to, nice thing is, applies to sort of all the collaboration, that you want consent, you want informed consent. And then I think Mary's point, again, excellent. You want to make sure that you're able to support the technology that you're asking your clients and staff to use, or the public, as Sun was talking about earlier. How do you make sure that whatever you put up on your website is actually accessible, and maybe how do you measure that?
Yeah. Well, we have 4 minutes. I think we are in good time.
Excellent. And we can have a break, an earlier break. I think
it's just us chickens now.
It's just us chickens.
Great. So I will go to Padlet. I took up a couple of
Thank you.
I took some notes. I took the thing of your point about document e-signing can be expensive because the